Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you a number of picture books depicting female role models from across the world and from throughout history who excelled in various professions from political science to athletics to science and technology. I read all of these picture books to my 7-year-old daughter and my 11-year-old son, and today I want to share with you my thoughts on these books. The first one I want to show you is called Malala's Magic Pencil. My daughter really loved this book. I think it's beautifully illustrated and the story is so nicely told. It was able to address really difficult content in a very nice manner, especially some of the more scary aspects of Malala's story. I really appreciated the book being sensitive to children who might find some of those situations scary. I think it was really well done. My daughter really loved this one and we read it often. The next book is called Look Up, Henrietta Leavitt, Pioneer Woman Astronomer. And this book is about a woman astronomer who wasn't really allowed to be an astronomer like the men. She was stuck looking over the pictures of the sky that were taken the night before by the astronomers, but through her dedication to her work, she was able to make important astronomical discoveries. And I appreciate how regardless of her limitations, she was able to be successful in a profession that really limited the capabilities of women. All right, another astronomy book. This one's called Margaret and the Moon, How Margaret Hamilton Saved the First Lunar Landing. I liked this book because it was just written in a really nice kind of upbeat way. I liked the illustrations. This one deals with a historical situation that is 50-ish years old, so it's not too far back in time. So I think that it helps young girls today have a better grasp of what their capabilities are within the industry of science and technology. So I really enjoyed this book. All right, the next book I want to show you is called Little Leaders, Bold Women in Black History, and I really liked this book. I love the illustrations. They are so charming and cute, and this book actually goes through many women in history. These would be Black women in history, and it starts off in about the 1700s and it goes all the way up to recent women today. So I really like how it spans several generations and across multiple professions. Now, we didn't read this entire book. We actually just read certain sections of this book, and I kind of like the ability to just read a little section, get some information about a particular person, and if that sparks interest, then you can go pick up a larger biography on that particular person. So I like how it collects a number of women together into one book, and it makes a really great resource. And of course, those illustrations are so cute. Summer Birds, The Butterflies of Maria Marian. My daughter liked this book. It's a really quick, simple picture book. It just deals with one subject area that I think is understood by a lot of children, and that is the subject area of butterflies and how they come from caterpillars. And I liked this book because while some of the other content in the other picture books was a little bit heavy for my daughter to understand and really get into it, and so this one is something that she grasped right away and she really enjoyed it. And the illustrations are different. They're really beautiful, but they're different than what I see in a lot of books. And so it was a fun, easy book to read. And I think it would make a great book for a spring unit or a nature unit. I Dissent. This is another one that my daughter really liked. This is the biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we really like this book. I also want to point out that there are some books that I really like the way that they have been printed. I like the dust cover. I like the paper. It's kind of like this matte paper. It's really good quality, and I really appreciate books like this. This book, again, was another one that my daughter was able to easily relate to. I just love the spunkiness and just the spirit of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I just really like this book as well, and so did my daughter. So I think another great female role model for young activists and just young women and men in general. Rosa, this was a fantastic book. It was so well written, and the illustrations are just perfect for this book. And again, this is another one that my daughter really liked, and it was just written in a really captivating story manner. And really, I learned a lot about this period in history, things that I didn't quite know about the whole situation with Rosa Parks. So I really appreciated this book a lot. We have another one about Malala's story. This is The Right to Learn. And this one, again, is really nicely written, very beautiful, similar to the last one. However, this one goes through some more sensitive areas in a little bit more detail. And so if your child was at all sensitive to violence and being injured and that kind of a recovery, if you feel like that would be alarming to her or him, to whatever child, then I would suggest Malala's Magic Pencil over this book. But I think both of them are really fantastic and really shed light on something that's recent. A lot of the books that I'm going to show you today are about historical situations or things that happened in the past, and this is fairly recent, and so it's nice to see this kind of female activism that's relatable for young children, especially since at the time she was young when she started her activism. So fantastic book, fantastic story, such an inspiration. Hidden Figures. This is also a fantastic movie. Really liked it. I loved the book. The only problem I had with following the story is that it's actually for women, and I wasn't paying attention the whole time to which story related to which woman. So I kind of just lost track of which story went to which woman. So this would probably require reading it a couple of times. And because I had seen the movie, I really had good context for understanding the story and the time period. My kids liked it all the same. I just think that it would require reading it a couple of times to really get a sense of each woman. And I like how they're all together because they interacted in their job together, but it would be nice to see books or biographies about each woman individually. And so I like how the back of the book actually has a section on each of these women. And again, this is also beautifully illustrated, really nice, high quality book. All right, Ada Byron Lovelace and The Thinking Machine. We actually have two books on Ada, and we liked both of them. Each of them had really nice illustrations and a great story. And this one was moderately interesting for my daughter when it got into some of the math that she's not covered yet, multiplication and algorithms and computers. She's just too young to have a good grasp on those math concepts yet. So she liked the story, but my son, who is 11, could understand the math a little bit more. And then algorithms, I think you need to be, at least in my experience, a little bit older to really understand the significance of that kind of math. But what I really, really liked about this story is that what she did with programming, it was light years ahead of her time. And so the things that we're doing now are the things that she thought about over 100 years ago. It's absolutely incredible. And her father was Lord Byron, the famous poet. So that's kind of a cool way. If you had books on Lord Byron or poetry, then you could kind of bring that angle into the book, and it would be a nice way to tie those two different people together. All right, Life in the Ocean, the story of oceanographer Sylvia Earle. And this book was nice. It wasn't like necessarily our favorite. We did enjoy it. We did learn a lot. It was a nice story. It's a great biography. And if you were doing a nature unit or an ocean unit, then I think that bringing in biographies of men or women scientists who studied in that field, I think would be great to bring some life to your unit. This book did inspire my daughter to think about building a city under the water. So it did have its perks. It did kind of ignite her imagination, but it wasn't like one of the top books that we read. Shark Lady, the true story of how Eugenie Clark became the ocean's most fearless scientist. My daughter loved this book. She asked to read it so many times. She really enjoyed it. It temporarily inspired her to become a biologist, an oceanographer, to study animals. She really, really liked this story. And also, I really like these women who face these challenges of, at the time, in the past century, where it was new for women to study science and they were discouraged from studying science, and she just pressed on, and she had the support of her family, even though on occasion people would say, well, why don't you become a secretary? Why are you studying science? And she was so dedicated. And I think that regardless of whatever profession you decide to do, I think that illuminating these qualities of dedication and perseverance are going to be good for whatever you do in life, for men and women. Women in Science, 50 Fearless Pioneers Who Changed the World. This is another great resource. Now, we didn't read this book cover to cover. We read certain biographies that related to the subject matter that we were studying. If we were doing a geology unit or an ocean unit or any other kind of unit, we could refer to this book to find biographies, which is a great way to bring some life to your science unit or your history unit or your math unit. It's nice to bring in a biography when possible. So this book goes through several women spanning from multiple, throughout history and from multiple countries. The illustrations are a little bit different, not quite the ones that I go for, but I think that it works for this book. Also, the text is a little bit dry. It's obviously not a picture book. It's not written as a story. It's a little bit more factual. But what I think is great about this book is that it collects all of these stories into one place, and then you can read through them, and the ones that inspire you to learn more, then you can go and get another biography or a picture book. So there are several women in here that we actually have picture books about them as well. Caroline's Comets, A True Story. This book was okay. My daughter didn't really seem interested in the astronomy books that much. She didn't like the illustrations in this book either, and I didn't really care for them at all either. The storyline is actually pretty interesting. There are moments where it's frustrating that this woman can't get the recognition that she deserves, and she allows herself to be an assistant, but the ending really turns around. And when she's been sort of employed by her brother all these years, or at least she works for him. I don't know, she gets paid as a singer, but she works for her brother. But in the end, he stops being a musician and he's actually employed by the king and becomes the king's astronomer. And so she now is sort of out of the job. So her brother says, well, that's okay. I'll pay you a salary. And she's like, I don't want you to pay me a salary. I want to be employed by the king. And so the king employs her. And so I love that perseverance and that gusto. I really like it. So even though there were a lot of good merits to this book, my daughter just wasn't that interested in it. Swimming with Sharks. This is another story about Eugenie Clark, or Jeannie Clark. And we liked this book, but we did not like it as much as the other book about Eugenie Clark called Shark Lady. So my daughter really liked this one, and you can kind of see that the illustrations are really different. You have like this kind of fun-ish kind of look, and you have this one which is a little bit more artistic, a little bit more serious, and it's possible that this meant that my daughter didn't like the book as much. I think when you start to compare books, you can start to get critical of them, but if she had read this one first, it's likely she would have liked this one better. So this one goes through her life. It highlights similar stories as what you'll find in here. So if you had to choose between the two books, Swimming with Sharks or Shark Lady, I would recommend Shark Lady because my daughter liked it better. I find the illustrations a little bit more lively, but both books are great as far as their content. And so I would say that both would be nice. I really appreciate that at the back of many of these books, there is more information about the about the person that the book is about, and which is really nice. Now, oftentimes I will start reading this and immediately it's just not written in a lively way. Of course, like the picture book is fantastic, and then you get to the additional information about the biography, and then you can tell that it's really written for like the adults to get more information about the person. And then, you know, it's nice to have that. Oftentimes you'll get a lot of information at the back of the book that you do not have throughout the book, and it really gives the information context. So if you get an opportunity either before or after you read the book, I highly recommend that you read the back of the book that gives more information about the picture book. So this one is called Grace Hopper, the Queen of Computer Code. And we loved this book. We love Grace. We love her. Just everything about her. She was just fantastic. This book has this really great kind of whimsical, fun illustrations. The book is so well written. I know that a book leaves an impact on my daughter if she decides she wants to be like the profession in the book, or she decides she wants to do something like it, whether she draws a picture or constructs something similar to the book. And in this case, she picked up on the little dollhouse, and she wanted to build a dollhouse similar to the one that Grace had built in the book. So this is just a fantastically inspiring story. I love the ending where, well, some parts are sad, where she's like forced to retire, and it's like the saddest day of her life. And then 6 months later, the Navy realizes, you know, we need you back. And then she goes to work for another 20 years. And she had already been working for the Navy for about 23 years, I believe. So when she went back to work for the Navy, they said, oh, we'll need you for another 6 months. It turns into basically half her career. So this also brings up another great point for discussion, whereas we're trying to break all these barriers on equality, like, you know, not to discriminate against women or people of color or coming from different countries. But then you have this discrimination against age, which is now something that seems to go it doesn't seem to be talked about as much. But age discrimination, I think, is something that we need to shine a light on it. And this is a great opportunity to discuss that, since she was forced to retire and then went back to work and worked for another 20 years. Just an amazing, amazing woman. The next book I want to show you is called The Girl Who Thought in Pictures, the story of Dr. Temple Grandin. I want to jump to the back of the book here, where it shows a timeline, and it also has a note from Dr. Temple. Where is that? At the back of the book. I really love this. Dear reader, as a child, I was really glad that my mother always encouraged my ability in art. I encourage you to find something you are good at and work at developing it. And then she goes on. It's by she signed it Temple Grandin. So this book is the story of her life. It's written in rhyme, and my daughter loves stories and poems that are written in rhyme. So she really liked that. The pictures are just kind of whimsical. They really match the poetry. I have to say that I kind of had a hard time understanding what it was that she did exactly. And so I think that reading the back of the book that talks a little bit more about her life is going to be helpful, because as I read the book, I wasn't quite sure what her achievements were, but it's still a fun book nevertheless. So my daughter was okay with this book. She was kind of moderate. She really did like the rhyming parts though. The next book is called Shaking Things Up, and it's 14 Young Women Who Changed the World by Susan Hood. I like this book because each of these different biographies is illustrated by a different illustrator. I also like the way the text is written. It kind of adds to the story. And it's also written in rhyme, and my daughter loves poetry and verse that's written in rhyme and books that are written in rhyme. What's great about this book that's different than the other collections that we have that contain a lot of different biographies is that these ones are short, they're kind of whimsical, they're interesting, they kind of inspire you to learn more. It's really easy to read this book cover to cover, even if you only intended to read a couple of different sections. It's also just kind of fun with the way that the the printing has been done. And because it's written in rhyme, it can bring a little bit of lightheartedness to some of the topic areas that might be a little bit heavier, or topic areas that you might otherwise not be interested in. I really liked the way that it was written. And originally I had intended just to read a couple of stories, but it was so good. We just kept reading it and reading it and reading it. And so it's one of those books that I would highly recommend this one. It was a lot of fun to read. And again, if you wanted to learn any more about any particular woman in this book, then you could go and get another biography, another picture book, or even just a chapter book about these women. So it's a nice way to get various, to be exposed to various women in history and across different professions. So we have another book about Ada Lovelace, and this one's called Poet of Science, the First Computer Programmer. And I like the title, Poet of Science, because her father was Lord Byron. He was a poet, and her mother was into science and mathematics, and I believe she was called the Princess of Parallelograms. And this story covers her entire life in a really beautiful, fun, kind of whimsical way. Love the illustrations. You can tell they're quite different from this book. Also on Ada Lovelace, you can see that these illustrations, they look like little masterpieces. They're just really, really beautiful. And while this one is really beautiful, I actually preferred this one a little bit more. I love mixing whimsical and fun and witty with something that's more technical, like science and computers and mathematics. And so I kind of like the mix of that. I also like the mix of like really frilly females in science, and whereas she might not have been a really frilly female, her mother was, and she had to go to all these dances and balls and these social engagements where she just didn't feel as comfortable as when she could go to like a science party. I can't remember what they were called, but where she met all these scientists. There's Charles Darwin and Faraday and Charles Babbage. And then the story continues about her work with Charles Babbage and the computer that he invented, or at least tried to invent, and her work in that. So I really, really liked this book quite a bit. All right, let's move on to Rachel Carson and the book that changed the world. My daughter really liked this book a lot, but primarily she liked the woman's early childhood on a farm. And my daughter really wants to live on a farm and explore and just be in nature that way. And so she really responded to that part. But then her life kind of moves in a different direction. There's the Great Depression, there's pollution, there's sickness within her family, and she's supporting, her mother and her sister and her nieces, and it starts to get really heavy, and my daughter didn't like that part as much. But this is part of this woman's biography. The book does turn around when finally Rachel Carson can get a job for, her within her profession and really makes a mark with her books. And it just shows this the perseverance of this woman. We really liked it. The ending's a little bit sad. The woman does die of breast cancer, and she's quite young. And so that if that's something that your child might be sensitive to, just that happens at the end of this book. Again, there's great information at the back of the book. I really highly recommend taking the opportunity to read this either before or after you read the book. And whereas I end up trying to read this aloud, my children totally tune out at that point. So I would just recommend, if your children are like mine and tune out when it comes to the epilogue, read this ahead of time and then try to interject some of those points throughout the book if possible. I know that my children love it when I can give them a little bit more information about the person that we are reading. It's just not always that interesting and captivating when I'm actually reading it from the back of the book. We have two books on Dorothea Lange, and this one's called Dorothea Lange, Photographer Who Found the Faces of the Great Depression, and Dorothea's Eyes. We didn't care for either of them. They're nice quality books. They're nicely written, but we just weren't really into the story, didn't really care for the illustrations that much. So if, you may have a different impression of this time period and this photographer and her life in the book. It just wasn't something that we ended up liking as much as some of the other books. It's nice to hear about her life and that of a photographer and a female photographer at a time when there were no female photographers. They were discouraged from doing it because the equipment was heavy and you had to mix chemicals. So it's sometimes funny. I'm going to use the word funny. It's funny what restrictions were put on women for really kind of ridiculous reasons. So anyway, both books had illustrations that we didn't care for too much, and the stories were both kind of written in ways that weren't quite as inspiring as some of the other books that I have here today. I really, really like going to the back of the book and getting more information. I find that to be really captivating, and you can see some of the photographs that Dorothea took and their impact on political changes that took place during the Great Depression and beyond. So that's a nice bit of history. We have Tree Lady. This is the biography of Kate Sessions, and we really like this book. It's really beautifully illustrated. It has a lovely story. We've had this in our collection for a little while, so we've read it several times. And also, this book takes place in San Diego, and it has to do with Balboa Park, which is a park that you can visit today. And so I like that this book also has some context for where we live, and so it's nice to be able to go and visit that park and then have like the book kind of come to life when we visit the park where she helped plant so many trees. So really, really lovely book. Really encourage it for either a biography or even a nature unit. She Persisted, 13 American Women Who Changed the World. And this was a really great book. I was actually really impressed with the stories, and the illustrations are just delightful. I really liked it. And this is another book that deals with multiple women. And so again, if you're inspired to learn more about any particular one, then you can go and pick up another biography or a picture book. What I really liked about this book too is that the stories about each woman, they're pretty short. Some of the other books that we have, each biography is quite lengthy, and sometimes it can just get a little bit hard to read through a book that has so much content. You start to forget, which story goes to which person, but this one is just enough content to kind of inspire you, hopefully, to read more about that person, and I just love the illustration. So really a great book. Again, goes throughout history and multiple professions, so it's been really nicely done. Who Says Women Can't Be Doctors? The Story of Elizabeth Blackwell. I loved this book, and so did my daughter. We really enjoyed it. And I love the story even more because Elizabeth Blackwell didn't think she was going to be a doctor, It just kind of was, the seed was planted by her friend who said, you should be a doctor. We could really use female doctors. And she's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I'll do that. And when she was told no by these schools, that just fueled her persistence. And again, that's a quality that I think is so necessary, whether you are a boy or a girl, man or woman, just having persistence and dedication and follow through, I think are great characteristics. And so I really especially like this book. I love the way it's written. I love the illustrations. And again, you get more information about her life back at the end of the book. So fantastic book. Solving the Puzzle Under the Sea. Marie Tharp maps the ocean floor. This is another woman in science who had a challenge in being able to do what she should have been able to do as a female scientist at a time where women, they didn't think women could be in science. And so she was really clever in how she was able to get the data she needed in order to pursue her research. And it had to be, we've come a long way. I hope we've come a long way. She needed to get a man to do to do she had to use her words in order to inspire other people in order to get the information she needed. She couldn't just go out and get it herself. That she was already kind of like, well, you can be an assistant or you can type up the reports. And it's like, she's a scientist. She needs to do her science. So I like the way that she was clever in getting what she needed. And then finally, after she got the data and mapped the ocean floor, she then was really recognized for her work. So she went about it in a way that was authentic for her, and it wasn't as forceful as maybe another person would have done it. She was really clever in how she did it. So really like the book. All right, so the last book I have is called Rosie, Revere, Engineer. And this is such a fun book. It's written in rhyme. So again, my daughter absolutely loves it. The illustrations are awesome. I love them. They're so like funny and whimsical and witty and just different and out there and just such fun. I really enjoyed this. And so this is hopefully a really inspiring book for young children who want to explore the sciences. And so for boys and for girls, I think that this would be an inspiring book. So really enjoyed it. All right, so I've got 2 bonus books to share with you. One of them I haven't read yet, but I've heard great reviews about. This is called The King's Daughter and Other Stories for Girls. So this has multiple stories for girls, and hopefully they are just as inspiring as all of the biographies that I showed you. I want to put this one out there. We did not get a chance to read it, but it's another one that would hopefully be great for a female role models unit. And then I want to show you an awesome book. I absolutely love this book. As soon as I was done reading it to my daughter, she wanted to read it again. So A+ for this book. It's called Yafa and Fatima, Shalom and Salam, and it's a story about a Muslim woman and a Jewish woman. Now, this is not a biography. This is actually based on an old Arab and Jewish folktale that's been reworked. I believe the original folktale had 2 brothers or 2 men, and this one has 2 women. It is so nicely done. It's beautifully written. It's amazingly illustrated. I absolutely love it. It's such a great book to have. This would be great for any kind of historical unit, a geographical unit about the area. Of course, a unit for tolerance and understanding different religions. Really enjoyed this book quite a bit, and it's so necessary in our world today. So fantastic book. Highly recommend it. And such a delightful story. So this is my bonus book for this video, since it's not specifically a biography. I hope that you enjoyed all the books that I shared with you today. If you have more books on amazing women biographies or picture books, please let me know down in the comment section below. I've left a couple of playlists linked here on the screen. You can go ahead and tap them and check out some of the other projects that we've done in our homeschool. And don't forget that you can find me on a daily basis by visiting me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.